be there today, but not in our building. They're going to be across the street in the MA classroom. And so that would be today, and then tomorrow is going to be their second day. And we'll be on campus tomorrow to do our NRP. And again, it shouldn't conflict and it shouldn't cause any problems because we'll be in the lab and they'll be across the street. And in fact, you'll probably not even see them unless they just walk across the street to say hello or something. And so tomorrow, of course, I'll be there to check you in. And anything else going on as far as administrative? I don't think so. We had a meeting yesterday, but it was a really short meeting and there wasn't much except for administrative stuff. Okay, and as far as your exams go, I still can't open them up yet because I just got another message. Someone was still having some challenges with their power. And so they're going to try to get it done today, which means that if you have any questions, you'll just have to send me a message because tomorrow we'll be busy with NRP all day. And then we come back on Thursday to cover a couple more chapters. Okay. So what time tomorrow? Which group did you sign up with? So there was a morning from 9 until 12, and then the afternoon group starts at 12:30. So it goes from 12:30 to 3:30. Does everyone know which group they're in? Because everyone went to that Google sheet and signed up, except for a few people, and I had to just manually just insert you in there so I could send the roster off to the people. So just make sure you know which group because they're going to observe that limit as far as how many people plus the instructor. I won't be part of the count because I'll be in another room, but just again, make sure you know which time that you're going into the lab. And if you want to see and want to verify it, I can post the link. Well, no, I don't have to post the link because it's still in the top of the Canvas module. So under the resources, there should still be a link that says, what does it say? Where is that link? Or was it in the last course? Probably was in the last course. Let me grab that link and just post it here.
I posted it, Dr. Roper, in the chat.
Oh, you did? Okay, thank you, because
just let me know if it works.
Yes, I can see it fine. Yeah.
All right.
Hopefully everyone else can see it. So that's the completed sheet there. Okay. And I think that's it. Did anybody have any problems with registering with the online for the NRP test? And hopefully when you look for the course, it said something about Carrington, NRP Carrington, or whatever the case is. When I sent that tutorial yesterday, and as I created like a dummy account, it showed me only the basic 7th edition NRP. And I didn't see anything that said Carrington. I think, but when you register and you and then you're affiliated with the school, that's when you'll probably see the NRP with Carrington. If you don't, I think it'll still be fine because it's still the same test no matter what. They just added the Carrington part to make it a little bit more, I guess, obvious when you go through the course catalog and you're looking for the course. But it's the same material. And I doubt that they would care one way or the other. And of course, if you haven't found any way of it, if there's no obvious way to print your test results or your certification that your certificate that you finished it or whatever the case is, just, of course, take a screenshot and then you'll have that with you if the instructor is looking for that proof and she can't see it herself when she goes into the HealthStream website. And what else do we have going on here? Oh, and I just want to remind you that yesterday we had to make some revisions to the calendar because it wasn't complete as far as our assignments that are due, the midterm quizzes, reading quizzes. One of those was left off and one was out of order. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a screen share and start with that first. So here we are in still week 1 or week 1 and 2. And then this Thursday, midterm quiz 1 will be due by midnight. And then on the following week, there will be midterm quiz 2 and reading quiz 1 that will be due by midnight. But again, as I said yesterday, we only have 1 chapter and it's information that I know you definitely covered in term 4 because, again, your posters are proof that you know what tetralogy of Fallot is or ventricular septal defect or whatever the case is. So it's the same information, just in a different textbook and with a different author. So that means that day, it should be a very early day. We'll get done with chapter 24, and then you'll have the rest of the day to prepare and make sure you get those 2 assignments done before midnight on next Monday. And then also to prepare for the exam. That'll be on Tuesday. Homework 2 is posted. So if you wanted to go ahead and take a look at that, and it's not due until next Tuesday. And then our checkoffs, we have 2 checkoffs that we'll be doing on next Wednesday. And also because of the time, we gotta have another reading quiz before the final rolls around the following week. So that Wednesday the 7th is going to be reading quiz number 2 that I had to add in because it wasn't there. And everything else was okay as far as one last midterm quiz, and then we go into finals the next week. Well, a couple more chapters that are not too long, and then we go into the finals. So this, as you know, with these little short courses, if they still try to cram a lot of stuff into it, it just means that you feel like you're going from one thing to the next without really taking a breath. It's like you're just trying to get it all done, and then just to jump into the last course. And then after the last course, it's done. Now, any questions before we start today's topic, which will be chapters 18 and 14? All right, well, let's go ahead and get this going. So this is inhaled gas therapy and surfactant therapy, essentially. So mostly the focus is going to be on nitric oxide. So we'll start off with just looking at what it is and how we use it and what its design purpose is. And then we'll look at like the pros and cons. I guess we can compare, contrast, like say nitric oxide versus some other type of vasodilator agent. And then with any drug therapy, we know there's going to be some risks, some hazards, some side effects, and possibly contraindications that we'd have to consider. So that way we be making the right decision, making the right choice. And then 5 talks about some other type of gas mixtures. There's really nitric. There's really about 5 or 6 different types of gas mixtures that we could deliver at the bedside, depending on what type of effect that we want to try to achieve with the patient. And then we will look at the mechanics as far as like all the equipment that's necessary. If you're going to try to do something like deliver a gas mixture for say like a patient that's on the ventilator or someone who's just in the ER who's not intubated. And then the last part of the chapter talks about definitely a specialty area, the inhaled anesthetics. And you would have to get extra training to deliver this type of medication in, say, like the ICU setting. And your ICU will have to be equipped for this. And we'll talk about the ins and outs of this because these are the same anesthetic agents that the anesthesiologist is using during your surgery. But we'll see that these things have many, 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 many benefits as far as what they can do besides just providing amnesia and anesthesia. Now, so your thoughts, let me make sure I post your thoughts to the right thread this time. So I'm in the group. Okay, so there's the link. Okay, so it looks like you're considering all right, you're considering maybe this or this. All right, so let's get rid of the 3. Leader flow won't have anything to do with what's being described here because we're suctioning out secretions. And this leader flow that they're referring to here is you have the option of connecting oxygen to the bronchoscope through that, what they call the multi-purpose channel or the working channel, the same channel that you would insert the saline to flush, and also any medication that you would want to get into the airway, you would insert it into this multi-purpose channel or working channel. But if you wanted to, you could literally just connect oxygen there. But a lot of times they don't even bother doing it that way. They'll just have the O2 say like a simple mask, and they'll keep a simple mask on, and then they'll just run the bronchoscope around the mask or on the through the side of the mask, or they'll have the nasal cannula in place, and then they'll just pull the cannula out of one side or one nair, and then they'll go down the nair with the bronchoscope. So that way, at least the O2 is still going into the other nair. And then let's get rid of this here. So cleaning won't necessarily have anything to do with this. And cleaning, of course, has to be done thoroughly if you got a bronchoscope that's not disposable. And let's just say hypothetically that the bronchoscope hadn't been cleaned properly. And it could suggest that maybe that was the issue as far as the scope not being clear and unable to suction. But that's not plausible because we have at one point the physician is unable to suction, which means that before this moment, suctioning was fine. So that would definitely get rid of the bronchoscope was not cleaned properly, because that would be a reach. I mean, it'd be a pretty long stretch anyway, just to say that this scope was probably dirty and clogged, and that's the reason why. So it really does come down to, is it that the secretions are just too thick, or is it that maybe the suction line or the tubing that goes from the suction canister to the bronchoscope, maybe it's not secure. And the best answer here would be that the suction line probably became detached, which can happen during one of those procedures, especially as they're moving this thing around. And this at one point is the main clue here that we have. So the secretions being too thick, and not likely, because it wouldn't make sense that you were suctioning before and then all of a sudden now you can't suction anymore. The secretions, if they were thick to begin with, then you wouldn't have been able to suction in the beginning. And then one other thing is these bronchoscopes are extremely powerful as far as suction ability. It takes a lot to clog them as far as, trying to clear away stuff from the airway. And if that was the problem, then of course you'd have to add more saline. Okay, so this is how your volts landed. The majority of people felt that suction line was the problem. Okay. Now, so anytime we do a gas mixture, and of course that implies that you're mixing at least 2 different types of gases together. And when we do it for our purposes, we're always trying to focus on oxygenation usually, and ventilation as well, but mostly oxygenation issues are going to require that we may have to consider using some type of mixture of gases. And then also we're looking at improving the pulmonary blood flow. So if you dilate your pulmonary vasculature, that will equal more pulmonary blood flow. And more blood flow, of course, should mean that you're going to have better oxygenation. You're going to have better oxygen. Good gracious. Excuse me, my allergies. I'm sorry. Okay. So as I was saying, if you increase your pulmonary blood flow, then that would mean that you should ultimately get better oxygenation. And then sometimes we may give a mixture because we're trying to constrict the pulmonary vessels, the pulmonary capillaries. We're trying to limit the amount of blood flow. And that would be mostly for redirecting blood flow. Like in a case of some type of congenital heart defect. I'm going to say to treat a congenital heart defect. And then reducing airway resistance or RAW, we know that when it comes to any type of reactive airway problem like asthma, then the only way you're going to get the work of breathing to decrease is to improve the airflow. So that's another, of course, main point. So that with that comes improving ventilation. And then relaxing your smooth muscles, your bronchial smooth muscles. So of course, this is pretty much saying the same thing as 4, is that if you make the muscles relax in the airways, then you should ultimately improve the gas flow. And you have to work as hard. So then we look into just some of the basic properties of nitric oxide. And of course, it's just a combination of nitrogen and oxygen. We have about 78%, 79% oxygen in the atmosphere, and about 20% of O2, rounded to about 21%. And then when you get these two together now, oxygen is highly reactive. And so it binds with nitrogen without any problems. And when you get this mixture, they describe it as almost like a sweet smelling. A lot of these gas mixtures, when they do come together, they usually end up giving some type of sweet-like smell if you were to smell it. But for someone who's, say, like hypoxic and in distress and et cetera, they're probably not even going to even be aware that this gas mixture that you're giving them has any type of like sweet smelling or taste sweet. And it's not a fire hazard when you're giving a nitric oxide mixture, even though we know that oxygen by itself is combustible and it supports combustion, but nitric oxide is pretty inert. It's not really going to catch on fire or anything like that. But it is unstable, so that means that nitric oxide can continue to mix with other molecules and form a whole new compound. And again, mostly because of that oxygen. Oxygen still would like to bind with something else if possible. So that's what makes it pretty reactive or highly reactive. And then these are just kind of like ballpark figures when you're looking at just the costs that are related to this type of therapy. The inhaled nitric oxide, or INO, as we call it for short, so the INO is pretty pricey, considering that you could expect to sometimes give this type of mixture over the course of maybe days and maybe around the clock. So then that could rack up the charges pretty quickly. And then they give us here another example of like another type of pulmonary vasodilator, Flolan. Flolan, about $220 a day. So I guess when you look at like which one is almost like a bargain, it would have to be the Flolan. But the Flolan can't really do what inhaled nitric oxide does. And we'll keep talking about how nitric oxide is such a selective vasodilator. And the other ones aren't really selective. And then we'll see the problem with that. All right, now the body makes its own nitric oxide all the time. I mean, it's in your neurons. Your neurons are used as a neurotransmitter. It's in your airways, it's in your muscles, it's all over the place. And because of that, as you see here in this figure, there's many different benefits that we're going to get from having nitric oxide in our bodies, or that when our bodies are using it or producing it. And it can go for anything from just like ensuring that that your platelets are working properly when you need to clot, all the way to, again, just vasodilating, because sometimes in the body, certain areas will need to be more perfused than other areas. And that would be, of course, a natural kind of thing that nitric oxide could perform and cause to happen. All right, so as I was just saying, when we think about where this nitric oxide is coming from, I mean, we reproduce it naturally. I mean, all animals do. And what it will mostly be designed for is to cause the improved perfusion. So the vasodilation, those capillaries, get them to widen, or just any of your blood vessels for that matter, get them to relax and widen, and then you'll get more blood flow. And then also, again, to regulate your platelets to make sure that, you know, you're clotting when you're supposed to clot and you're not clotting when you're not supposed to be clotting. And even has a part of your immune response. So that's a definite benefit that we have, as well as, again, your neurotransmitters. So we have multiple agents that the body can use for neurotransmitters, and nitric oxide is one of those neurotransmitters, in addition to, say, like your norepinephrine or your epinephrine or acetylcholine, and et cetera, et cetera. And then when we look at what's going on in the muscles themselves, well, we know that calcium is a huge part of muscle contraction. And once the calcium is released, then you should get proper muscle contraction. Now, if your goal is to try to relax muscles, then you really don't want that natural process to happen, as far as the calcium being released and then your muscle fibers now sliding past each other, and muscle now shortening, contracting, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, so this is one diagram to kind of just give us a picture of what's happening when it comes to nitric oxide and its effect on the pulmonary capillary, or any vessel for that matter, how it's affecting that muscle layer. And then here, this came from an article in the AARC, in the Respiratory Care Journal. And this gives us like a pretty good overview of what you can expect to happen. So what nitric oxide will do is, first, you give the patient the nitric oxide mixture. And then once it diffuses out of the alveoli and makes its way into the pulmonary capillary, so the first thing that's going to happen is, now that it's inside of the muscle layer of your pulmonary capillary, it's going to combine with this guanylate cyclase, and then eventually you're going to end up with cyclic GMP, or cyclic guanine monophosphate. And then once this is produced, this is what's going to cause your muscles to relax. And then you should get better blood flow now that the muscles are relaxing. The inner diameter of that vessel is now larger. And then it doesn't stop there. So once the nitric oxide has left, once it's left the actual muscle layer, and now it's in the blood flow itself, it's going to quickly combine with hemoglobin and form methemoglobin. And that's what's going to cause it to become inactive. So once it combines with the hemoglobin, nitric oxide won't have any more effects, because now it's in the bloodstream and it could travel to other areas of the body and cause those areas to relax. But that won't happen once the hemoglobin has come along and combined with it, and you've got now methemoglobin. So then, as far as like the PA, we know that would just mean pulmonary artery. And then over here, eventually, the blood is heading to the left side of the system. So this is just saying left atrium here. Okay, so here's the whole point of using nitric oxide. It's a selective vasodilator, meaning that if you have an area of the lung, let's draw so now let's say that this area, let me find another color. Let's make this area really bad. Consolidation. So if this area is consolidated, we know that the VQ mismatch or shunt in this region is going to be pretty bad. It's going to be pretty high. And so that means that all the blood that's passing by these alveoli that are collapsed or full of fluid, that blood is not really going to pick up any oxygen. It's going to end up just going back to the body without fresh oxygen. Now, what nitric oxide will do is, once you inhale it, where's nitric oxide? Another color. So nitric oxide is only going to cause the areas that are well ventilated to dilate. So in other words, now you're going to create more blood flow to the region that isn't affected, that isn't diseased, or that isn't completely collapsed. And if you do that, then that means that you should now better your chances of improving your overall VQ mismatch, because that area that's consolidated is still consolidated. And you really don't want blood going to that region, but blood will still go to that region. So now, because it's selective, nitric oxide will never make its way down to this region. I'm just going to write the good areas. And good meaning that where there is adequate gas exchange and there is no atelectasis and there is no consolidation. And never the bad areas. So now, if nitric oxide wasn't a selective vasodilator, it would dilate every area of the lung. I mean, as far as the pulmonary capillaries. So then what would happen if that were the case? So let's say that it didn't choose just to work on the area that's good. If it dilated the vessels down here, now you're going to have an even bigger shunt or an even bigger VQ mismatch because you've got more blood flowing to a region where there's still no gas exchange taking place. So that's going to be problematic because that could take your shunt from, say, like 40% to like maybe 60% or even higher. So when you give other vasodilators or pulmonary vasodilators, that's the problem, that's the risk that you run. You risk causing your shunt to just become even greater than it was before. So that's why nitric oxide is just heralded as like one of these like really, really nice medications, almost like a miracle drug where it could target just the good areas to improve your overall VQ mismatch and shunt. So that's what this is pretty much all saying. Only those vessels that are located next to the alveoli that are good, that are already doing gas exchange, and cause them to relax so you can get even more blood flow to that region. So again, these other vasodilators like nitroprusside or nipride goes by. It's just one trade name here. Nipride or prostacyclin. If they give that, then again, you just have to almost anticipate what's going to happen as far as increasing your shunt or making your shunt even worse. Now, there has been so much debate on how much of this drug that we give our patients. And it's just, no one's going to really, I think, reach a consensus on what we should be giving. But pretty much all protocols and almost all hospitals are going to kind of say the same thing. And they're going to say that we should start somewhere around 20 parts per million of this drug and then titrate from there. Now, the authors that you read, well, most of the authors have done research on this. What you'll read with them is that anywhere from 1 to 20 is where you should be considering starting the nitric oxide. But just about every hospital, at least all the ones I've worked, it was always start at 20 and then go from there. Works really well with babies and very random results that you get with adults. So sometimes it was like, let's just try it and see if it works with the adult who's like, say, experiencing some extreme oxygenation challenges, refractory or ARDS. But then with the babies, when they are experiencing their baby ARDS, which is just respiratory distress syndrome, then this will usually show, it'll usually work out for them, if it's going to work, that is. And we'll, of course, talk more about nitric oxide when we get into the pulmonary disorders chapter. Okay, now, if your baby has pulmonary or persistent pulmonary hypertension, hypertension of the newborn. Now, PPHN, we'll, again, get to the other chapter and then we'll start calling it something else. Because again, kind of really be described two different ways. We could say it's just persistent pulmonary hypertension, or we can say it's persistent fetal circulation, which is what they used to almost always call it, or PFC for short. But either way, if the mechanisms didn't take place as they were supposed to after the baby was born, meaning that your ductus arteriosus should start to close, or it should continue to close, your foramina valley should close, all these things that are supposed to happen. The pressures on the left side of the heart is supposed to become higher after they take that first breath, and then the pressures on the right side become lower. If that didn't happen, then that means that you still have fetal circulation, and now the baby's born, and that's going to create a lot of hypertension or pulmonary hypertension. So we would give like nitric oxide therapy to help dilate that pulmonary vasculature and improve oxygenation, because with PPHN, there's going to be definitely some hypoxemia. So again, 20 to 30, and if you go much higher than 30 and the saturations are still not really improving, chances are it's not going to work, because it's not guaranteed to work with every patient. Sometimes it's just not going to work. I've seen neonatologists go up to like 60, and they were just like hoping that something would happen. But then by that point, again, you might as well just say it's never going to work out, because if it's going to work, it'll happen early on, meaning that once you start at 20 parts per million, you should start to see some benefit. You should start to see some improvement in color, saturation, and then if you go up a little bit more, you should see a little bit more improvement. And then once they start to get much better, then you could start to slowly wean or titrate it back down. And if you can get it back down to 20 and they're still okay, then you can consider just discontinuing it from 20. But the last point here is just saying that whatever your max dose is per your facility, if you reach that and it's not going to work, and just you might as well just turn it completely off. All right, now this is the company that will usually produce these little devices that we use to deliver the nitric oxide therapy, and they refer to these things as Inovents, even though they're not a ventilator per se, but that's just their name that they give it. And the interface that we have here is pretty simple, and there are just some main things that we're going to be monitoring when we give this type of therapy through this interface here. So here, this is showing you exactly how much of the nitric oxide that you're delivering. Like right now, it looks like this is 0. And then that looks to be 5, 10, 20 parts per million, 40, 60, 80. And then here, your FiO2. So you'll connect oxygen to this machine, or at least maybe you will just connect it straight to the wall, to the O2 source. And then that way you can dial in your FiO2. And then here, NO2. So NO2 is what we're really monitoring closely. So when nitric oxide combines with oxygen, it forms nitric dioxide, or NO2. And NO2 could be toxic to the cells and certain concentrations. So once again, your policies will dictate at your facility, how much is too much? Is it like 2 parts per million, or is it 1 point something parts per million? In other words, the lower that this number is, the safer you'll feel that the patient is at that time. And then over here on this side, it's just showing, again, whatever your NO that you have set to be delivered, it'll be showing up here as well. Now, let's say you have to set up one of these for a baby who isn't intubated, who's just using like an oxy hood or an O2 hood. Then it would look something like this. So here's our machine, our INO vent, that's going to, of course, deliver the nitric oxide. And then there's this little gas injection module or injector module that you would have to insert into the system some way, because this is, of course, how the nitric oxide is going to be delivered, through this little injector module. It's always good practice, no matter what, whatever kind of setup that you're doing, if there's some humidity involved, there's like, heated humidity or whatever the case may be, you always want to make sure that you take that injector module and insert it right before the humidifier. Like in this case, instead of inserting it here and then to the patient, you're going to insert it here, then it goes through the humidifier chamber and then off to the patient. All right, so again, it's kind of fuzzy here, but it's still displaying the nitric oxide that we have delivered, which is about 20 parts per million. And then the nitrogen dioxide, which is it's looking like maybe 0.2 parts per million right now. Now, the funniest thing that I can remember about nitric oxide therapy is it's amazing what some hospitals can do to increase their revenue. Like each department, of course, is going to be responsible for maintaining its own revenue and budget and et cetera, et cetera. And this one hospital that I did a travel contract with in Maryland, the first day they told me a little bit about what was going on as far as their policies and procedures and processes. The rest of it, I just had to kind of like figure it out and pick up from, just kind of pick up and go. And one thing that they told me was like, you may get a call from the OR to set up nitric oxide. And I'm thinking, why? Why can't the anesthesiologist do it? And so I didn't question it. So the first time I got called to one of the ORs, I get there, I didn't know what to expect. So I'm thinking I was thinking I was going to have to set everything up from the beginning to the end, like completely. And I get there and they say, okay, it's ready. And I'm like, okay. So literally they just hand me the injector module and I had to insert it into the ventilator circuit or onto the humidifier. And then the anesthesiologist said, okay, thank you. And I left. I'm like, what was the point of all that? So then I thought about it. I was like, okay, this has got to be another billable charge that the RT department can use to increase their revenue. Because like I said, otherwise, it must have been like one of those meetings that they had to say, is there something that we could do? Is there something you can have us do that would allow us to make more money? Because it's a billable charge. And like I said, for that little 5 seconds that it felt like that I was there, I just felt like this was pointless because the anesthesiologist had already done everything else. And it's just like literally, it's like, okay, just put injector module in place. But anyway, that was just something that I always just, like once you get into the workplace, you'll be able to probably determine a lot of the politics and the whole like the bureaucracy and you'll start to see like the business side of the whole model versus just like the actual patient care side of it. Okay, and looks like I guess this is a good time for a break. So let's just take our 10-minute break and then come back and continue from there.